Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And the Shabbat, the Sabbath that precedes the holiday of Shavuot, the holiday when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, we always read the chapter, the beginning of the fourth book of the Torah, beginning of the book of Numbers, which begins with the word Bamidbar. The name of the chapter is Bamidbar, and the entire book is called Bamidbar, which literally means in the desert, in the wilderness. As the verse opens up, the fourth book of Numbers, just for the record, this book has several names. Every book in the Torah has several names. It's called the Sefer HaPekudim in Hebrew, which is the book of counting or numbers. That's where the numbers come from. Because in this book, this fourth book, the Jews, there are two census. The Jews are counted twice, in this chapter and later in the chapter in Pinchas. So, for example, the book of Exodus is also called the book of redemption. But there's another name for these books, which is usually based on, well, they're not usually, they're all based on the first words. The first chapter of the book is usually the same name as the entire book. Actually, not usually, but all of them. Like Sefer Bereshis, chapter of Bereshis. Sefer Shmois is the book of Shmois. Sefer Vayikra is the first chapter and the third and the name of the book. Bamidbar is the chapter and the book, and Devarim is the chapter and the book. So in addition to the name Numbers, which is the more conventional name, secular name, the actual name that is most referred to in this book is Bamidbar, the wilderness. I know Numbers is a lot more poetic than wilderness, but in a way wilderness is more accurate, because though there are the two senses in this book, but it's not the entire theme of the book. Whereas Bamidbar is the first words and the beginning of the chapter and the beginning of the entire book, and it happens to be that in this case, this entire book is all about the journeys through the wilderness. Every chapter in this book happened in the wilderness, and most of the chapters actually talk about the journeys, the 42 journeys. Some of you may recall a few years ago, I wrote up a psychological profile based on the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. Baal Shem Tov, whose 250th anniversary of his Yortzeit is coming up this Shavuos. Next Tuesday night, Wednesday, will be 250 years from the Baal Shem Tov's passing. You'll be hearing more about that from me. So the Baal Shem Tov says a beautiful thing about the journeys through the wilderness. He says we all go through these journeys in our lifetime. And in some of his teachings, he talks about the different steps. So what I did was I did research, and I wrote up actually the 42 journeys of our lifetimes, how we all will go through 42 stages in our life. And if you haven't seen it, you send me an email, I'll be happy to send it to you. It's online, it's on meaningfullife.com. Just type in 42 journeys, you could probably find it. So these journeys all take place in the wilderness, and they all take place in this book. So it's apropos that the book is called Wilderness. But on the other hand, when we say the word wilderness, immediately evokes all kinds of images that are not necessarily good dreams, more like nightmares. A wilderness is a tough place, is a wild place. The word wild, wilderness, the wild place. A place where there was, as the Torah says later, that it was a very, what does it say? It says, Midbar Kosh, that it was a very dry and parched wilderness filled with serpents and scorpions. So it was not just an arid land, it actually was quite dangerous. And this was the wilderness that the Jews traveled through to the promised land. So it's, I think, appropriate to talk about this. Why would an entire book in the Torah be called wilderness? Why would this chapter be called wilderness? And why do we read this always before the giving of the Torah at Sinai? As I said, it's not very life-affirming and seemingly positive to focus on a wilderness. It's one thing you focus on Mount Sinai, where they received the mandate of God, the mandate of the human race to transform this world into a spiritual habitat. It's another when you're building the temple. It's arriving at the promised land. But the focus on the wilderness, at best you can say, was a stepping stone leading them to the promised land. But when you give the name wilderness, Bamidbar, to an entire book, you're focusing clearly not just on the end, but also on the means. And if you really think about it, the entire Torah actually doesn't take place in the promised land. Even though in the book of Genesis there are chapters that discuss how the patriarchs lived there, but the most of the Torah is how the Jews did not live in the promised land. After the great famine, Jacob and his family are forced to go down to Egypt, and from there on, that's it. So if you really want to be specific, the living in Israel, from the biblical point of view, really is only in a few chapters. In the chapter Lech Lecha, God tells Abraham to leave his homeland and go to Israel. Then he lives there, Vayera, he's forced to go to Egypt. But let's just for argument's sake say, Lech Lecha Vayera, Chayesara, Teildes Vayetze. Teildes. 4 chapters about Israel, then Jacob is forced to leave Israel and gets married. 20 years he's away from home. He comes back to Israel where he yearns toward. And then he's forced, after the great famine, to go to Egypt. So you really have maybe 4 or 5 chapters, 5, 6 chapters in the entire Torah that really talk about our ancestors living in the promised land. All the rest, after that period, after basically from the chapter Miketz, close to the 3 chapters before the end of Genesis, the Jews go down to Egypt, never to return, at least in the Bible. They would then be enslaved in Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, and then began their long journey through the wilderness. And the end of the entire Bible, the end of the entire Torah, is how the Jews come to the east bank of the river Jordan and do not enter the promised land. That's where Moses dies, goes up on the mountain. And it's only later in the book of Joshua that follows the 5 books where the Jews enter into the promised land. So it's interesting that most of the Torah is not even focused on the destination. It's more about the journey. And what kind of journey was it? Besides the journey going out of Egypt, the journey within Egypt, which itself was the hardships, the bondage, the genocide, the exile. Then when they come out, you'd think, okay, by now God should just take them to the promised land. They deserve it. No. Another 40 years. And that becomes the predominant amount of the Torah focuses on those 40 years. Because remember, from the beginning of Exodus, basically almost 4 entire books of the Torah focuses on 40 years. The 40 years when they left Egypt until they arrived to the river Jordan. So 4/5 of the Torah is about this journey through the wilderness. Which makes you think that this Torah, the blueprint for life, a Torah called the Torah of life, a Torah that's supposed to give us direction and is supposed to give us spiritual strength, most of it is focusing on actually the hardships of life, and specifically the wilderness, as this for the book is called. So even though the other books don't have that name, but they all do happen to take place all in this wilderness. What is the significance of all of this? And so let me begin. I remember years ago giving this class, and with my good friend Philip, who now gives a class on Thursday nights. He came early on in these classes. He was beginning to study Torah for the first time. So Philip once came to me at the end of one of the classes and said to me, I've been reading the Bible every week since I've been coming to this class. I began to start reading, what does my heritage teach? And he was reading the chapters each week after week. And in that type of innocent, sincere type of question that can only come from someone who's really reading it with sincerity, as opposed to someone who's been used to it for their entire lives like myself, he asked me this blunt question. He said, it's not a very pleasant book to read. Every story is fraught with all kinds of problems and dysfunctionality. And starting from the beginning, Adam and Eve in the garden, and then they serpent and they eat from the tree of knowledge. They're banished from the garden. Cain and Abel, Cain kills his brother. Then you have the battles that lead to the struggles that lead to the great flood, destroys the universe. Then you go to Abraham, And you have Abraham's family doesn't get along. His children don't get along. He has to banish his son. And then Jacob and Esau battling in their mother's womb. And then you have the tribes selling or trying to kill and then sell their brother Joseph. I mean, there isn't one. If you looked at this and didn't know it was the Bible, this would be like a series of dysfunctional family issues, a great soap opera, and it just never ends. There's no family that's intact. Everybody's got an issue. Moses, then the great Moses comes, and people fighting with him. Every time the Jews leave Egypt, God gives them bread. They don't want bread. Then He gives them water. They don't want water. Then they don't like the taste. And then this. I mean, it's like they never learn. And I remember when Philip said it was so funny in a way, because every time you hear, okay, you think now that's it. They've learned their lesson. No, the scouts go to Israel. They come back with a bad report. Then comes Korach. Then comes Balak. And then comes Bilam. I mean, it just doesn't end. And the way he asked the question was like so, it struck me as well. What kind of Torah is this? Who wants to be part of such a family that are killing each other and incest and murder and betrayal? I mean, it's exciting. Like they say, you want heaven for its climate and hell for the company. But everything has a limit, you know. This is the Bible. This is the book of God. If you read the spiritual books, you don't feel that way. You read a spiritual book, it's meant to give you a certain sense of tranquility. You know, today you have books like that. You have even music. What do they call it? That type of meditative music that just makes relaxation music. The whole point of it is to get you away from the chaos of life, just get you in that type of relaxing mode. The water is running, and you hear birds chirping, that type of naturalness. You read the Bible, it's a lot of violence and anger and punishment. And even if there is a deeper spiritual story, where there is, but the obvious and the blatant story is not something you want to read to your child to put them to sleep. You read, as I said, other spiritual books, religious books, they're about love, about peace, about harmony. So the Torah absolutely has beautiful messages about love and virtue and so on. But if you put it all in balance, there's also a lot of bloodshed and a lot of loss, a lot of violence and anger and all these betrayals, as I described. So it's a great question, wouldn't you say? So he forced me to think about it, and I responded the following. Torah was not given in heaven. It says, Torah lei b'shamayim hi. The whole point of Matan Torah, what we're coming up to the holiday next week, is that God came down on earth to give the Torah. It says God came down on the mountain. He didn't lift human beings up to heaven, which is not just a physical sense, lifting them up. He didn't force them and didn't ask them to become spiritual angels before they received the Torah. He brought the Torah down here, and the Torah actually says, Torah lei b'shamayim. There's a verse that says the Torah is not in heaven. It was given down to earth. It comes from heaven, but it was given to earth, to earthly creatures, to earthly human beings, like ourselves, flawed, with weaknesses, mortals. All of us have our iniquities, and that's where the Torah was given. So if the Torah was written as a book of tranquil book, it would have been a nice escape. It may be very calming, but it's not dealing with the realities, the harsh realities of life. The power of Torah is that it's a spiritual blueprint, not for angels in heaven, but a spiritual blueprint for very limited and flawed creatures like us. That's a much bigger achievement. It's one thing you say, we only will accept students that have reached a certain level of refinement. It's another where God says, no, I'm going to give you a blueprint in a wilderness, not in a beautiful environment, in a harsh wilderness, because that's what life is about. We all begin in the world as a cruel, tough, primal world that is very harsh and very savage even at times. And that's where the Torah is given. And therefore the stories, even though, yes, they're not type of bedtime stories where you just calm you down, even though if you read the deeper message it does, it tells you about real life, where brothers are killing brothers, and where there's betrayals, and there's lies, and deception, and murders, and oppression. But it reflects real life. And that's what I realized from Philip's question. He was reading it very innocently, and he hit the nail on the head. The Torah is not about a happy ending, not a movie. The Torah is about reality. There is a happy ending, but only because but as a part of the reality. It's not denial of reality. And if you think about it, it's absolutely mind-blowing, because when you look, for instance, in books, as I said, spiritual books, there's a certain, like, out-of-touch reality there. It may lift you to another place, and it could be very empowering and very calming, as I said, and very spiritual. I'm not taking away from that. In the Torah, too, you read more mystical writings, and you read the more esoteric. It's also that way. It doesn't deal with the nitty-gritty. But that the Torah, at the same time that it has such a spiritual depth, is dealing with, like I said, on the other extreme, real life in the coolest fashion, is very empowering, because it's saying, if the Torah only had tzaddikim, meaning they're all tzaddikim, but I mean if it was only beautiful stories where everybody's getting along, and everybody is peaceful, then you'd say, something, this is not my life. I like to read about it. It's like always liking to read about heroes and reading about happy endings and knowing that there has to be a happy ending. But the Torah wanted it to be something that's one part. Zeis HaTorah Adam, it says, the Torah that reflects real life. It's our life. The Torah is like a microcosm of your life. And if you look at your life, it's filled with disappointments, unfulfilled expectations, broken dreams, broken promises. Yet, despite all that, the Torah says we have a deeper script that's playing itself out. And if you access it, you can find the divine even in that darkness. So if you think about it, initially, it's not as comfortable, the Torah, because it talks about so much negative stuff. So yes, if you were going to be scored by points of how calming the Torah stories are, there are many fairy tales that are much more relaxing. Would you say? Shia, wouldn't you say that? A lot of fairy tales that are much more relaxing than a lot of stories in the Torah that are very much filled with violence and anger and all that. But if you want reality, that's, because the Torah is saying, I know about the cruelty, and I know that this is a world of a wilderness, and still, I can give you a path and hope and strength to get through this wilderness. So it's one thing you go to a guru, or you go to a mentor or a teacher, who lifts you up to another place. There's a certain beauty to that. They lift you into a world of a certain nirvana, utopia, a world where you're like protected, an oasis from the difficulties of life. That's fine as an escape. But then you say to yourself, you know what? What happens when I go back into the harsh wilderness of the world? Will I also be able to maintain this level of high spiritual integrity? The Torah says, listen, this is a wilderness. The world is a wilderness. Look at all the characters in the Torah and all the families. There's fighting going on, brothers killing brothers, selling them into slavery. The whole works, as I said earlier. And still here is where you can find the divine. So that's a much more powerful and dramatic message, and much more realistic. Because if you ask yourself about your life looks much more like the Bible's story than it does when you read some of the spiritual books, that everything is perfect and everything is beautiful. That's the way it is in heaven. If you want a book about what's going on in heaven, there are books that talk about what souls do all day. They're very relaxed. There's no neurosis. They don't go to therapy. They just go through divine service, loving and fearing God. They sing songs of praise, and they don't have any challenges. Talk about Mount Sinai. When Moses went up on Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, so the angels, these celestial angels, came to God and said, Chem de Gnuza. The Torah is your most precious, secret, hidden gift, treasure. Why are you giving it to these lowly, inferior creatures? See, here's how the story goes in the Talmud in Shabbos. So Moses hears their complaint, and what do you know? What do you do when you hear that? God is there, and the angels are there, and you're there. Moses turns to God. Listen, God's giving it to me. What are you looking at me? So God turns to Moses and says, "Why don't you answer them?" Which was a little unnerving. You're giving us the Torah. Why are you telling me to answer? But God wanted to demonstrate. Moses, you want to deserve the Torah, show that you can answer a question like this. Why am I giving it to you, to the human beings on earth, and not to the angels? So God sensed that Moses was fearful. So God said, hold on to my throne. And Moses held on to God's throne. That's the way the Talmud puts it. And he began to answer. So with God's strength, he answered as follows. He said, let's open up a Torah. As a good advocate, a good lawyer, a good attorney, Moses said, let's open up the book that we're all talking about. Yes, it's a hidden treasure, divine treasure. So they open up the Torah. And what does it say in the Ten Commandments? Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher etzisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am your God that took you out of Egypt. So Moses turned to the angels, with God watching, and said, were you ever in Egypt? Okay, so this verse is irrelevant to you. You were never in Egypt. And then it says, Kabed esavicha v'simecha, honor your father and your mother. He said, well, do you have fathers and mothers? Do you have a temptation that you don't want to honor them? Are you challenged? And then it says, Le signev, don't steal. And Le sitzach, don't murder. Do you ever feel like the urge to murder or steal something? So basically the entire Torah is not relevant to you. And that's when God, of course, smiled and was happy because Moses answered correctly. He proved that the Torah is not for them because all this is not relevant. So what did the angels mean when they said, they're not stupid angels, what did they mean that the Torah belongs to us? They were saying, on the spiritual level, the Torah has also very deep spiritual messages. Why give it on this mundane level? They were really asking the question, the Torah doesn't belong on earth. And Moses was responding with a profundity that the purpose of existence is not in heaven. If God wanted the purpose to be in heaven, we would have no earth, and we would not have a cruel world and a harsh world, and God knows how harsh this world can be, and people hurting each other, and duplicity, and all the dangers and troubles and concerns that all of us deal with on a daily basis. Death, loss, tragedy. If God wanted a pure world without all of that, he could have simply not created earth. And therefore the Torah, when it talks about stealing, and it talks about murder, and it talks about do not do it, but there's a possibility, means the Torah was given in a wilderness, not in heaven. And not even in Jerusalem or other beautiful cities all across the world. You've been to many beautiful cities, right? He gave it to a wilderness. Did you ever take a trip through the 40 years in the wilderness? That's what I want to see you do. Then we'll know you're adventurers. Huh? Yeah? Yeah, right. And without any acronym, without a driver or anything, walk from Mitzrayim to Even Hayard. What do you think? It's a challenge? Listen. So, he didn't give it in any beautiful city. He gave it in a dry, arid place of no civilization. Midbar lo yoshav adam sham. It's a place where human beings cannot live. It's not a habitat for humans. And that's where God gave the Torah, because to demonstrate, as I just said, like the whole Torah demonstrates, all the stories in the Torah, none of them are perfect endings. And none of them are simple. Every one is full of deceit, betrayal, murder, kidnappings, rapes. I mean, you name it. Everything, every ugly theme exists in the Torah, because God was saying this Torah is for this world, and I want to show you that you can go into a world like this, not where there are angels, and even though there may be a temptation to steal or to murder, or you may be in Egypt, or you have parents, or other issues in your life, even in a world like that, you can create a divine home for me. Of course, that's a much far greater challenge. So the Torah is a true reflection of life. In its entire brutality and bluntness, candidness, without mincing words. Does that mean it's easy? No, it's not, but it means that it's real. So you can trust it. And you can see that it's not like, as I said, you have a teacher who you can say, okay, he or she's naive, they live in some spiritual world, but when if they saw the real world, they would never be able to be so pure. Torah is saying you can be pure even in an impure world. And that's precisely why we read this chapter Bamidbar before the giving of the Torah at Sinai, and why an entire book is designated to the word Bamidbar, wilderness. As I said, what kind of name? Wilderness. It's such a it's a very almost, why Why would you call a book a wilderness? As I said earlier, this is not necessarily a book you want to read to your children to put them to sleep. You start reading it, some of it is not exactly very soothing. Calling a book the wilderness, but think about it on the other hand, that's real, blunt truth. The Torah is telling you this is the way it is. You live in a wilderness, life is a wilderness, the earth is a wilderness, and I want you I'm charging you, God says, with the power to tame the wilderness and turn it into a civilized place, into a place of virtue and light. It's a formidable challenge, but I've given you the power to do so. Now that's a real message to think about, because it means there's nothing on this earth that can overcome a human being, that if you set your mind to it, you can tame even the harshest circumstances. So let's go a little deeper into this thing called Bamidbar, midbar, what it really means. There's an expression, Elam Kotten Zeh Adam, the idea of microcosm, macrocosm, that the human being is like a small universe. That's what the Medrash says. And actually goes into specific detail that every aspect of the literal topography of the earth exists in human beings. Just like there are valleys and mountains, there are also valleys and mountains on the body. Just like there are trees and animals and minerals, we all have that within ourselves, in a microcosm. The reason that was made that way, it's like a hologram, is because God said that you, the human being, have the power to elevate the universe. How do you elevate a universe? We're only one among 6 billion people. You elevate your own small universe in a microcosm, and when that's magnified and amplified, it has the power to change the world. The Maimonides, Rambam says a very powerful statement, but needs explanation. He says, Le'elam, a person should always see themselves, and see the world, as half good and half evil. Meaning, have virtues and have, what does he call it? He says, mechze zochius and mechze, we're half responsible, so think of it like a scale that is balanced. So it's true, it's a big world, but if it's balanced, it's half and half. Half virtues and half the opposite of virtues, vices. That's the word I was looking for. And when you take one mitzvah, you do one good deed, this is Maimonides, you tip the scale. So most of us think, what's the big thing if I do an extra deed, good deed? There are billions of people in this world. My deed makes a difference, it's like a drop in the water. What would a drop add to a big ocean? The Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. Means nothing. Now, the story they tell about this town, a very poor town in Eastern Europe. And they were like almost unknown by anybody because nothing prominent going on. But the king of the land decided to choose this town, a place that he's going to stay for the weekend, for Shabbos. So, of course, the entire town, such a thing comes once in a lifetime. They prepared greatly for cleaning up their city, their town, to host the king for the weekend. But they were a poor town, and they were thinking, what could they give the king? They have nothing. So the story goes, they decided like this, since they all have a little, they'll try to bring it all together, pull it together, and give some type of gift to the king. So they set up a barrel in the middle of the town, and the goal was that each person, each family, as hard as it was, would contribute 1 cup of wine in this barrel. And by the end of when the time king comes, and everybody pours their cup of wine in, the king will appreciate it because he'll understand that relative to such a poor town, this was a special gift. They give him a barrel of wine from the town. And everybody could, as difficult as it was, everybody could afford a cup of wine. So of course these were shrewd people. And they said to themselves, listen, why should I waste money on a cup of wine when it takes me a whole year's salary just to find such a much, to be able to buy wine like that? So many thousands of people in this town. I'll pour a cup of water in. Who's going to notice? Everybody's going to pour wine. I'll pour a cup of water. Now, of course, everybody in town was just as smart as this guy, as this family. And they all decided the same thing. What's the big thing? I'll pour my cup of water. So they ended up giving the king a big barrel of water, basically. Because everybody was... So on one hand, you say to yourself, what am I going to accomplish in a big world like our large universe? And now forget about 6 billion people. If you think in terms of cells and microorganisms and subatomic particles, you're talking about trillions upon trillions and trillions. It's unfathomable, the sheer scope of the universe and the solar systems and many solar systems and so on. What is one speck, one human being, you and I, in our little corner of the world, what difference can it make? So there's always the answer given in that famous metaphor where a guy is walking on the beach and he sees these shellfish, clams and others that got grounded on the beach on the dry sand. And if a clam stays too long in the dry sand, it will die. So he's throwing back the shells back into the water. They should survive. So one guy says to him, you know how many clams are on the beaches? There are millions. What difference is it going to make if you throw one back into the water? And he answered, he says, it'll make a difference to this clam. That's what will make a difference. So yeah, if you're thinking in terms of numbers, it's a numbers game. But for this clam, it makes a difference. So if you think of it that way, it's a qualitative issue, not a quantitative. But still, how does a person envision creating any type of change in this world when we're just one human being? What can you really do? Which, of course, is the greatest voice of resignation. It's a great excuse not to do anything because you're just one. So Maimonides gives this brilliant analogy taken from the Medrash of the scale. It is true, if you were just one on this side of the scale and everybody else was on this side, of course, how could you change the tide? But he says a person has to always look at the universe because we don't know what's going on, that everything is balanced. It's a balanced scale. So there's 6 billion people on this planet. Think of it, 3 billion are on this side of the scale and 3 billion are here. And your one act is what tips the balance. And that's how a person should have his attitude in life. It's not about thinking who else is doing, because then you're not supposed to be looking at others. Look at yourself. And if it is balanced, it doesn't matter how large it is, that one little move changes the entire course of history. Today, it's not that difficult to explain with other analogies that didn't exist in the time of the Rambam. For instance, computer code. Someone asked the question, what's the big thing if I turn on a light on Shabbos? You have the question, small little thing. What's the big thing if you add one dot or take out one dot in millions of lines of computer programming code? It's a difference between, it could be the difference between life and death. It could be the difference between it working or not working. One dot? You know how many lines of code exists in any particular program? But we know a dot, because it's not about quantity. It's quality. To use a more extreme example, in the human body, there are 70 trillion cells. You say, what's the big thing if one cell becomes mutant and, God forbid, malignant? Yeah, it's the difference between life and death. 1 out of 70 trillion? What are the, because it's not about quantity. We live in a world today where you understand that size does not matter and that it's in the microscopic level, one little shift can change everything. And on the other hand, you can have very big machines and they don't change anything because they're not affecting the core essence of the entity. So, going back to what I just as an introduction, Olam Katan Zeh Adam, human being is a small universe. We are not just 1 in 6 million or 6 billion. And we're not just one among trillions and trillions and trillions of universes. You are a microcosm of it all. And when you, on a microcosmic level, do one little thing differently, the entire universe is impacted in the same way. So this is going beyond Maimonides already. Maimonides is saying, consider everything to be equal, and you're tipping the scale. Here it's even more than that. You are the universe. And that's why when the Talmud says that when you save a life, you save a universe. It says, God created the human being as an individual. All the creatures that the Bible says were created as in herds, in groups. Male and female groups. Animals were not created individually. They were created, all the cows in the world were created together. As a group. Not that many, but as a group. Only the Fichach Nivra Adam Yechidi, the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin. Why was a person created as an individual? So he should know, or she should know, that Bishvili, because of me, the world was created. I am like the center. Not as an arrogant way, in a responsible way, that you can change the course of history. Animals cannot. They will follow their clock They will follow the script for which they were created till the day they die. And then their children and offspring will do exactly the same. They will never change the course of the universe. Not for better and not for worse. Humans can make it better or can make it worse. We can improve life or we can destroy life. Animals will go through their script, the balance that they have, and the beautiful natural balance of the universe. Whereas human beings have the power to change because we are the universe in a sense. We are the microcosm. So as an introduction, to go back to what that medrash, Ovis the Rab Nosson says, that each of us is like a large universe, or a small universe rather. And the universe, it says, Adam Gadol Zeh Ha'elam. Just like Elam Katan Zeh Adam, the human being is a universe, a microcosm. The large universe is a human being, a macrocosm. And we all reflect each other, and we're all connected to each other. So there is a wilderness also within ourselves. Not only is there a wilderness, I was talking about the wilderness of the world, and that God intentionally wanted to give the Torah not in a beautiful habitat, and not in heaven, and not in a beautiful restaurant or beautiful city on earth, in a wilderness, where there's Nochash, Sharav, Akriv, Eretz Tziyah V'Oyev, a land that is parched and thirsty and empty, also spiritually, where human beings do not live and cannot live. It's not at all conducive for human life. And Nochash, Sharav, Akriv, there's serpents and the scorpions and other dangerous animals. And that's where Mount Sinai is, in a wilderness, and Har Sinai is in Bamidbar Sinai. Sinai also, the word Sinai, some places interpreted comes from the word Sina, hatred, because it's symbolic of the divisiveness, the duplicity, and even the hatred that exists in this world. And a world like that, where there can be so much hatred, and cruelty, and selfishness, and narcissism, and war, and violence, that's the world where God wanted the Torah to be given. And that's where He wants us to transform that universe. And the Torah reflects that in its name. And the fact, as I said earlier, that 90% of the Torah takes place in this wilderness. Only a few chapters talk about the patriarchs as they lived in Israel. After the famine, from the time that Jacob goes down with Shivim Nefesh, the 70 souls, to Egypt, the rest is all either in Egypt or in the wilderness. From Parshat Boy, when the Jews leave Egypt, everything from there on is Bamidbar Sinai. 42 journeys from leaving Egypt, Ramses, till they reach Ever Hayad in Mizracha, which is Arvis Moav, in the plains of Moab, on the eastern bank of the river Jordan. Entire Torah, 4 books, almost 4 entire books are dedicated to that. 40 years. And just to drive the point home, the book of Genesis begins from creation till the death of Jacob and the tribes, is a little less than 2,000 years. Almost 2 millennia. And the rest of the Torah is 40 years. You can see from that alone that the Torah's emphasis is disproportionately more about a wilderness than it is about Israel, or the Promised Land. Yes, there's a yearning and a search, and Moses prays 515 prayers, Veschanon, to reach the Promised Land. But where's the Torah? Where's the center stage of the Bible and the Torah? It's in the wilderness. Because that's what God wants us to transform. And it's not just a stepping stone. You could say the wilderness, it's the journey. But we're waiting for the destination. The destination does not come in our Chumash. It doesn't come in Moses' times. It comes in Joshua's times. Because the Torah, the center Torah, the 5 books, which is the essence of Torah, is given in the wilderness. It's meant to reflect our lives. Had the Torah been given in the Promised Land and focused on the Promised Land, then we could always say, you know something, it's a good Torah for people who live in a Promised Land. What about the rest of us who live in hell? Or worse? Or live in difficult situations? It's not for us. Moses had a similar small experience like that. When Moses first sees the burning bush, the first time he has a divine experience, the great Moses. It's interesting. The great Moses, the first time God appears to him is in a burning bush. Abraham saw God in his own way. He was not in a burning bush. Moses, who would see God like no man ever saw, it says later that Moses spoke to God like a friend, face to face. Yet it all begins in a burning bush, a thorn bush. And Moses' sneh, which is like Sinai, by the way, comes also from the word sneh, from the word hatred, because within trees, a thorn bush is like a hated tree because it can bear no fruit. It's considered to be a thorn bush, a very negative type of experience. That's why it's called sneh, like Sinai. And he sees the burning bush, and it's not being consumed. Fire is burning, and it's not being consumed. So the Medrash asks, why did God appear in a thorn bush? You'd think the first time he comes to Moses, he should appear in a apple tree, in an olive branch. I mean, there are not a lot of beautiful forms of trees that God could appear in if he's going to already appear in a tree, in a vine, in a grapevine, etc. If he wants to appear already in a thorn bush, he could have appeared in a rose bush. It also has thorns, but it also roses. Rachel, it says on Rachel, it says that Shoshana ben Acheichim. She's like a rose amongst thorns. But here God appears in a thorn bush, unadorned, like the wilderness itself, that bears no fruit, and just a plain thorn bush. So the Medrash asks, why? And the answer is simple but mind-blowing as well. The Medrash says because God wanted to show Moses that no place in this universe is devoid of me. Even a sneh, my presence can even be in a thorn bush where there's no fruit, nothing growing, a place of a sneh, like an angry place, a place that is dead. Even there, Einoid Malvada, even there I exist. The question is, why did God have to make this point to Moses? So why didn't he appear in a thorn bush to Abraham? Or to all the other prophets? Why to Moses? Because you have to remember the context of the story. Why was he appearing to Moses? Because Moses was going to be the redeemer of the Jews in the lowest place on earth, Ervis Haaretz, Egypt. Had God appeared to Moses in a beautiful environment, Moses would have said to God, that's very nice. You appear in beauty, in light, in music, in everything that's so beautiful. But you're sending me now to redeem the Jews from a dark, God-forsaken place. And I'll tell them I met a God of beauty. They'll say, yeah, he's a God of beauty, but he's not with us when we are suffering. So God, in his wisdom, understood and preempted, anticipating this question. He said, no. I am not appearing to you in a beautiful place and we're going to both be going on some siesta. I'm appearing in a thorn bush. Imei anechi b'tzara. I am with you in your pain. And you tell the Jews, as much as they suffer, I see and I'm with them. Earlier in the chapters in the Genesis, it says, an interesting verse, it says that when the city of Sodom was very cruel and wicked, God says, Erdana, he says, let us go down, let us descend, to hear Haktsa'asa, the cries of the people of Sodom. And just this one verse becomes the basis of literally thousands of pages of Hasidic texts and Kabbalistic texts. Why did God have to go down? He does not see pain from heaven? And the answer ultimately given is because it's not about God seeing. Of course God can see wherever he is. God is beyond, not a physical entity. But it was about God experiencing it, not just seeing it. And Erdana is an example that the divine actually manifests. It says, Rashbi says, coming from Lag BaOmer, he says that one of the statements is, Chvivin Yisrael, look how special Jews are, that wherever they went to exile, Shechina Imahim, Golo le'Edem, they went to Edom, the Roman Empire, the Shechina was with them. They went to Babylon, the Shechina was with them. What does that mean? God is in exile? The answer is yes. Shechinta b'Gula is the concept of God is in our pain. As difficult as it is to understand or explain, there's that concept. So God, anticipating this, tells Moses, do not think I'm just sending you to Egypt, to a difficult place, and I send the human race to a difficult place. I am with you there. And in my own mysterious ways, I created the universe in such a way that can be so cruel. But never think I'm not with you there. And I suffer with you, and I cry with you. Obviously, this has to be understood not in anthropomorphic terms, because God does not cry and suffer as we do. But there's a certain presence that we have. The divine is with us in pain. And that's what God was trying to demonstrate to Moses by appearing in the thorn bush. There is no place that's devoid of me. I'm there with you. And you can tell the Jews, I'm not watching just from heaven. I'm with you in it. So of course the big question will be, is if you're with us in it, why don't you get us the hell out of here? You know? Well, that already gets into the mysteries of existence and the partnership we have. And God is a partner with us. He helps us. He helps those that help themselves. And it goes two ways. That already gets into the whole mystery. I mean, you could ask a better question. Why create the whole thing in the first place, and we don't have the problem, and we don't have to get out of this godforsaken place? So clearly there's a purpose in this whole, there's a madness to this, what's the word? To this, there's a method to this madness, right? There's some, what was the word I think they said about Ronald Reagan? Eternal optimists. The eternal optimist is the farm boy that walks into a barn, and the barn is filled with manure. You know what manure is? From the floor to the top. Tell your husband if he doesn't know what it is. And the farm. Listen, you sat right in front of me. You're going to be a carpenter there. You know, that's it. I was. So he comes in this barn, and the barn is filled with manure to the top. And what is a farm boy, an optimist farm boy? He says like this: there must be a pony in here somewhere. You know, most of us would say, "Oh, you know what?" And the farm boy says, there must be a pony in here somewhere. He sees the pony. He doesn't see the rest of it. So there's two ways of looking at everything, I guess. Half empty, half full, as they say. So God appears. That's the wilderness. But let me go back to the personal side. I was saying that this goes much deeper than just saying that we have the power to transform a difficult world. And that's what the Torah was given to us. Not that it says, the whole Torah was given only to create peace in this world. In heaven, you don't need peace. There's no arguments. There's no arguments in heaven. And there are holy arguments. It's this world where there's a world of chaos and war and discord and divisiveness. But the plot thickens. Because to go back to what I was beginning earlier, there's a wilderness inside each of us. And this is, of course, a little more complicated to talk about. I wrote about it in the email, and I realized it's a little raw, so let me put it, so we'll be even more raw here, since you decided to come. The human being, as I said, is a small universe. So everything that exists in the larger world exists within you. Everything. The great things and also the terrible things. Let me just qualify. That doesn't mean that, God forbid, if somebody murders someone, you're a murderer within inside you. And not that you're accountable or responsible. But in some subtle way, everything out there exists within us, and the potential of it exists within us. For truly sensitive souls, this takes on a very, very profound meaning. I'll just begin with a story that is just always touches me. First time I heard it. The story is told about the Mittler Rebbe. He was the son of the Baal Tanya, Reb Shneur Zalman, had a son called Reb Dov Ber, the second Chabad Rebbe. And he was, as it was common among Rebbes, mentors, spiritual mentors, people would come see them and consult with them about whatever matters, personal matters, business matters, life matters, anything that they felt they want to come from. So there was what's called a yechidus. Yechidus is like the name, which means really being alone with or intimate with a Rebbe. The Hasidim would say yechida and yechida, the yechida of your deepest part of your soul connecting to the deepest part of the Rebbe's soul, and there's a connection. And listen to what happened. So this Rebbe would see, as I said, different times, he would have these people who would come see him. They would make appointments and they'd line up. And especially after the holidays, Tishrei, during the high holiday season, many guests would come for the holidays, and before they left, then back home for the rest of the year, they would go in for a blessing or for advice. And of course, you can imagine what kind of tears and soul and heart was poured out in that room. just as an aside, I remember I heard a story from the Rebbe, my Rebbe, you could say our Rebbe. He would receive many letters every day, thousands of letters. So the secretaries decided, to save time. He would open his own letters. They decided to save time. He would open them by hand. They bought him a letter opener. And they put it on his desk. The secretary comes in and sees that the Rebbe is not using the letter opener. So he thought maybe it's too noisy. Letter openers are very noisy. So they looked all over the place, and they found a very expensive letter opener that's very silent. It's a silent letter opener. They changed it, and they put the silent one down. And he also wasn't using it. So finally, the secretary couldn't control himself, and he says to the Rebbe, the Rebbe could save so much time, and more time dedicated to reading the letters and answering them, than having to open them with his own hands. And this is what the Rebbe answered him. He said, people lick these envelopes and write these words with their tears and with their blood and with their sweat. And you want me to use a letter opener to open that? In other words, they deserve that I could open it with my hands. So to go back to this story, so there was one particular year, holiday season, and there was a lot of people waiting to see this Rebbe, this Mittler Rebbe, and they were lined up. And each one had their time with him. They'd come out with a smile, with a blessing, with hope, renewed hope. And things were rolling smoothly, till something happened. One guy went in to see the Rebbe, and after he finished, the Rebbe closed his door and told the secretary that he would take a break, which was uncommon, because the Rebbe knew people were waiting. But he thought maybe the Rebbe is tired, maybe he has some things he has to do. No, of course, they waited. 10 minutes passed, 15, 20 minutes. And it's got a half hour, an hour. And there's a long line of people. So the secretary, realizing, tells the people, listen, I don't know how long it's going to be. If you want to wait, you can wait. If not, come back tomorrow. And we can resume. But it was very unlike the Rebbe to keep people waiting like that. He could have said, tell people. But he didn't question it. But he did hear behind the door, he hears the Rebbe weeping. And he saw clearly there was something very serious going on. But anyway, the night passed. The next day, the Rebbe resumed, as if nothing happened. After the season ended and everyone went back home, the secretary had the opportunity, and he asked the Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, maybe you can explain what happened. The Rebbe would like to explain. So the Rebbe said, I'll tell you what happened. When people come to see me, and they share with me different experiences, and they have questions, and so especially when they share some type of soul or personal issue, for me to be able to give them advice, I need to find within myself a similar situation. So I can identify, I can empathize with them by seeing a reflection of what they're going through in my own way. So it may not be quite the same way, but in a subtle way, the dakos, I find the same type of thing within myself. I could then relate to that person. I could correct it within me, and I can give them advice how to correct it within them. There was one particular person came in, and what he shared with me was so revolting, so disturbing, I could not find within my soul anything similar. It just was something that it didn't say what it was, but it was so terrible. And I could not give him advice, because I couldn't find it within me. So that's when I had to stop, and I had to search, because God would not have sent him to me for advice if I did not have something similar inside of myself. And finally I searched and soul seeking, soul searching, until I found it, and that's when I was able to resume. This is the story. I mean, to me, it's an unbelievable story. You talk about therapy and healing. You see what means, it's not like people think a good practitioner is someone who's very trained, very experienced, and you come to them, you're the vulnerable, unfortunate one, and this person is like the God or the master. No, a true soul doctor like this Rebbe is in it with you. It's not like giving you wise advice. He's in it with you, and he can be there. Like I said before, with God in the thorn bush. He's in there with you in the wilderness. It may not be quite in the same level, obviously, because our problems and our iniquities, our inadequacies are far from the Rebbe's inadequacies, but in a subtle way, as I said, a human being is the entire universe. You have everything inside of you. True soul people live that way, and they feel that way, and they're able to help the world that way. That's why they know how to empathize. It's not just they're sensitive people, Because they're humble people. They don't look at your problem. They see your problem as their problem. And if it's not corrected within them, it can be corrected within you. And if it's not corrected within you, they remain also incomplete. Can you imagine? So people who are really good at these things, you think, I'm fine. You got a problem. They don't always tell it to you that way. But here's what the true sensitivity was. Moses was exactly the same way, by the way. As he led the Jewish people, you'll see, he always says, Sheish raglia ha'am anechi bekirbecha. He speaks about it like it's within me. If there was a flaw in the Jews, he saw it as a flaw inside of himself. Moses was on the mountain when the Jewish people built the golden calf, and yet Moses, lech reid megedulascha, because the greatness of Moses was given for the people. So the people are not in a complete, you're not complete. You could say Moses was not with them. How could you blame him? But a leader is with his people whether he's sitting there with them or not. It's like they say, if you knew what happened, then you're responsible. And if you didn't know, you're even more responsible. Because that's what a leader is. A shepherd is responsible for his sheep. Moses could not enter the promised land because his people could not enter. It impacts on them. They say the Arizal, the holy Arizal, his students asked the question, why did the Arizal, who was free from any blemish, no sin, as was witnessed by some of the great people in his time, why did he say Al-Chet on Yom Kippur? The question is asked. Al-Chet is when you say the confession and you mention all those sins. How could the Arizal say it about himself? It's not true. He didn't have any of those sins. And one of the answers given is because as a tzaddik, as a leader of a generation, he has every sin that every human being has. Not in the same intensity, but in a subtle way. Because if the generation is not complete, it means he's not complete, and vice versa. Because we're bound together. We don't live in a world of plurality. We are all really one. And the sole people of this universe feel that. We don't feel it. We feel we're different. So your problem is not my problem. But those that truly feel that our problems, we celebrate together and we suffer together. And when one part of the universe is not complete, the rest of us is not complete. As I said, those that are truly sensitive souls feel that, experience it, and live that way. And that's why they see their responsibility not just to take care of themselves, but to help others as well, because that's the way they correct their own lives. So we have within ourselves also a wilderness. When you're younger and you're more naive, it's a fascinating discussion. When you're a little older, it gets very uncomfortable discussion. What does your darkest, ugliest place look like? When you're at your worst. So everybody's got their ugly corner. We're not going to be, I'm the only one speaking here now, so we're not asking you to define what that ugly place is. But everyone's got it. And there's a lot of shame around it. And sometimes it's, especially if you're aware of it, you'll have that place where you don't think anybody's watching. And you're alone. And we all have it. It could be in your thoughts, it could be in your fantasies, it could be in your actions, in your words. We all have a wilderness within us. We have that wild beast, the wild animal, untamed. Could even be savage. What would you be like if nobody was watching? We look around today, look at the corporate world. So once a regulation falls apart, and there's no regulators and no one watching, what are people capable of? What would you be capable of if you were sitting upon millions and millions of dollars, and you knew you can get away with it? How many people would just be ethical because God is watching? It's a good question. And again, I'm not asking you to answer. But we all have a part of ourselves that is not something that necessarily we're very proud of. Some philosophers and thinkers say that's the real you. Freud called it the id. Others have other names for it. But it's like, not the yid, the id, I said, ID. The yid is, as we'll soon discuss, is a deeper place. So that's about that narcissistic, selfish, raw entity. As Freud said, take away the ego and the superego, the need to coexist with others, the seichel, shame, conscience. We are absolutely savage beasts. And some will even prove it and say, look, put a person to the corner, push them, torture them, put them in a situation of survival, life and death, And you'll see the worst will come out of them. And we've seen it, unfortunately. You have the tragic episodes of people reverting to cannibalism because they have nothing else to eat. You hear this about people climbing mountains and they run out of supplies, and then they'll find the weakest one. It doesn't begin with outright murder, it begins with subtle. But then when you have nothing left, people will eat each other and then they'll kill each other. And some say you don't even have control, because when hunger starts affecting the brain, we turn into something we would never imagine. Someone told me one of the most dehumanizing things that they experienced when they were in the concentration camps was that when close to the time of the liberation of the camps, so the bombings began. The Allies were bombing Germany, and those bombs would sometimes fall near the camps in the last days. And once there was a bomb that fell in this camp, and a few bodies literally were blown apart, and the people were so hungry that they literally ran to the gates where there was little pieces of flesh and blood and eating it because they were so desperate. So that's how they dehumanized people who on their own would never, we all have our sensitivity, but you cannot know what happens when you're under certain circumstances. And I'm not judging them, I'm just stating it. You don't hear these stories because they're not so, they're not really the movie material. So, no one should ever be tested in this way. But clearly an argument could be made that we have a very deep wilderness inside of us, and maybe that's even our natural self. You won't usually hear people talk about this. You're not going to hear a Dvar Torah about it, usually, in a synagogue, or rabbis discussing it in classes, because it's not very comfortable topics. Who wants to talk about the ugliest part inside of us? Yet, when the Torah says, that here's an entire book called Midbar, a wilderness, so yes, it's easier to talk about the wilderness outside of us. Out in the street, people are hostile, cruel, people killing each other. Who knows what people are doing? It's much harder to talk about the wilderness in here, inside of us. But the Torah was given, and that's why God appeared in the thorn bush, and that's why the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, not just for the beautiful part of your soul, and for when you are at your best. It was given also to transform your wilderness. Because as I said before, Freud had it half right. It's true, the id is a very powerful force, but there's a yid with a yud that's deeper than the id. The pin to the yud, the spark. That beneath the wilderness lies one thing. There's a God in there. There is a pony in there somewhere. I don't want to call it Havdil. There's a God in there. There's a spark of the divine. And it may seem completely concealed, but that's why God appeared in the thorn bush. That even in the darkest and the ugliest part of your life, there's also God. And even there, God watches. And that doesn't mean it justifies your behavior. But don't think that there's a part of you that's so-called outside of the picture. And that's why the Torah doesn't mince words when it talks about all these blunt and brutal and violent things. It wants to say, I am there with you wherever you are. And the goal here is not just to elevate the beautiful part of yourself. The goal is also to tame the wilderness within you. In one way, you could think, well, that's a pretty interesting statement, but the fact is actually, it's quite a freeing statement. Because most of us do not want to talk about that ugly side. We will avoid it by all means. If you go to therapy and you have problems, or any other way, that's the last thing anyone will ever talk about, their ugliest side. First of all, we minimize it. We never say it's as ugly as it is. Second of all, it's very difficult to acknowledge. It's embarrassing. And third of all, a lot of it we don't even know ourselves. It could be so ugly we just block it out. But everybody's got that dark space, that dark place. But there's something extremely freeing to hear that you're not the only one there. Others have it too. So don't think you're so unique in your ugliness, let's put it that way. If you ever think that if you're getting too arrogant or something like that. We all have our little dark blemishes. And as I said, even with that Rebbe, it's not similar to ours. It's Bedakus, it's a subtle of the subtle. But everybody has their little black hole, their little wilderness. And that is ultimately the place. And that's why I say it's freeing to know that. But more freeing is that God is with you there too. And if you make a little move, you can transform even that place. That is a very powerful, I think, literally transformative concept. Because you'll hear about a lot of spiritual systems. They'll teach you how to meditate. They'll teach you how to escape, how to elevate yourself to another state of being, a state of consciousness, a higher state of awareness. That's all great. But you always ask yourself, what happens when I go back to my little ugly place? To that little corner when I'm all alone and I'm not there with all that beauty and light. In my own little thorn bush. What's going on there? And most of us say, that's not for publication. That's not for discussion. The interesting thing is, no, that's where the Torah is given. The Torah is given for that place. Not in heaven, not even in the heaven within you, but in the wilderness within you. So the powerful statement is that when it comes Shavuos, Matan Torah, the Torah was given Leba Shemayim Hi. That doesn't just mean not in heaven and on earth. It also means that we also have a heaven within us. Our more sublime faculties, our more beautiful experiences, but we also have a wilderness within us. When you are at your worst, or when you're capable of being at your worst. And God does not just want your beauty, He wants your ugliness. And He wants it to be transformed. We say in the Shema, V'haftas Hashem Elokecha, love God, B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha. With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. B'chol meidecha sometimes interpret also with all your money, which is like might. B'chol meidecha. But b'chol levavcha is the word I want to emphasize here. The word state doesn't say b'chol libcha in Hebrew. A heart is a lev, not levav. So the Talmud says, why does it say b'chol levavcha with two bases, levav, heart that has lev, two. So it says b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, because the heart has two chambers, right and left. It reflects the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. God doesn't just want your love with the right side of your heart, with the tzaddik in you, but also with the left side. That even the shnei yitzarecha, that even the part of you that is ugly, the wilderness, should also learn to love. So that itself is, as I said, a very mind-blowing concept, because how many spiritual systems really focus on that part? They focus on ignoring it, on avoiding it, on escaping from it, but transforming that part. As a matter of fact, it says there are two types of tzaddikim, two types of righteous people. There's like King David, who says, Libi chol b'kirbi. He says, my heart is like a hole inside of me, a vacuum, an emptiness inside of me. Why? Because he says, Hargu b'tanis, he killed his Yetzer Hara. So basically what he did was kill that part of him. So that way he only has his good side. But that's not considered the optimal. That's not transforming the ugly, that's killing the ugly. Then comes, it says about Abraham, it says that Abraham had both parts of the heart. He transformed that second half. Didn't kill it. It was not an empty part, didn't remain a vacuum inside of him. Because a vacuum means it still can return. Maybe it doesn't return, but the fact that there's a vacuum is still a memory, is still a tombstone that reminds you that there was once something ugly there. The second dimension is someone who transforms, who can transform that, even the ugly, to the beauty. So you could say, how is that possible? How could you transform ugliness to beauty? The answer is because within the ugliness there's also beauty. It's just deeper. Because there's no such thing as anything that's complete evil. Even the most evil expressions always have a root of some type of, in a way you could say, a holy passion. Because you have to distinguish between when a person is doing something ugly. I'll give you an example. I remember once speaking for a group of, what was it called? Counselors who were dealing with rehab, drug and alcohol rehabilitation for teenagers at risk. And I asked them all a question. I said, so what do you think is the root core, the root problem that most teenagers cause them to use drugs? And everybody came up with brilliant psychological ideas. Some said lack of love and nurturing in their lives, and they're trying to replace it. Some they're looking for attention, peer pressure, it's easy, it's a high. Everyone had their thing. And they're all probably all legitimate as well. But I don't know if it's the root. And I said the root, and I meant it in a very practical sense. The root is boredom. boredom is the biggest challenge. And later, I asked one of them to ask actually the teenagers and ask them, and they all acknowledged consensus, all of them, it all begins with boredom. You think boredom, what's so bad about boredom? Yeah, boredom is a vacuum. It's an emptiness. When you're bored, and you have nothing that's exciting you, it's usually when the worst things can happen. Because you're looking some way to fill, to relieve the monotony, and to relieve it than looking. Because a human being, especially a person, and all of us have some passion and excitement, and we need passion. Passion is a very healthy thing. A person that doesn't have passion is lacking the electricity of life, the energy of life. So, imagine you have a lot of passion inside of you, but you have nowhere to release it. So a vacuum begins to build, and when there's a vacuum, vacuums are much worse, much more dangerous than actual danger. Because a vacuum attracts everything that's negative. So then you start looking for a way to get a high. And if you can't get it in a healthy way, you'll get it in an unhealthy way. The point I was making to them was that there's an antidote to that. It's not about scaring the kids and saying, don't take drugs, it's addictive and all that. You could try that. It's filling the vacuum in the first place. If you give someone a healthy way to express their passion, they don't need an unhealthy way to express it. Especially creative people, you'll find, who have the highest level of octane and energy, are the ones that can get most in trouble. Because the greater a person, the more the Yetzer Hara is active. Because they're very energetic and they're very driven. But if you can channel it into something that's healthy and positive, that becomes a healthy drug. That becomes a healthy addiction, meaning they're doing something positive with that passion. If it doesn't, it's going to become passionate in an unhealthy way and an addictive way. The relevance to our discussion here is this. Behind even the ugliest things we do, the worst types of cravings, or lusts, or passions, or temptations, have to be broken into two parts. There's the root of it, which is the desire to have something in your life. Whatever that. And then the second is the object of the desire. The power to desire is holy. God gave us that. The object of your desire can be very ugly. And sometimes they become indistinguishable. So when a person craves for something and it ends up being a very destructive thing, a very ugly thing, a very inappropriate thing, a very unhealthy thing, decadent even, you have to remember there's an energy that is invested in this. Where's this energy coming from? This energy didn't begin in a negative place. It began in your soul that wants something very much. A yearning, a hunger. Except it couldn't find it anywhere in a healthy way. So instead of taking, for example, a healthy drink of water, you drank poison. But you were desperate for a drink. You're so thirsty. So the root of it is the thirst. The thirst is fine. The problem becomes how you fulfill your thirst. So the key is learning how to, in a way, divorce, almost amputate the object of desire from the power of desire. It's the key to all real healing. Now, sometimes it's almost impossible. Why? Because they become so intertwined that the person who's addicted, they can't distinguish between the two. They think the object is the desire. They think, but it's not the object. Does any human being on earth want to be addicted to drugs? Of course not. They want the high. The addiction is not what anyone wants. You wish you could have the high without the addiction. No one starts out saying, I want to become an addict. I want to become an alcoholic. I want to become a sex addict, a gambling addict, a gambler. No one says such a thing. It always begins with either a vacuum and a passion, and then it starts being released a certain way, and then it becomes a habit that's almost impossible to break. Every addiction, every habit is that nature. So they become so intertwined that it's almost, lack of a better way to express it, like a cancer, where the healthy cells have been taken hostage by the malignant cells. And the only way to get rid of the malignant ones is to kill some of the healthy ones. But I'm not getting now in interventions of how one does this. There are ways to do it. And there's a lot of different steps and that's not the discussion right here. It deserves its own, to do justice to this, it deserves its own discussion. But the point I want to make is that the point that you can transform ugliness to beauty, not the object. The object you destroy. But the passion that's invested in that object can become a passion that becomes directed and channeled to holy things. People think a tzaddik, a true great person, soulful person, is someone that doesn't have, excitement in his life. He's like a boring guy. He learns Torah and does mitzvahs all day. That's not true. He's a passionate person, as passionate as the most passionate person you'll ever meet, except his object of desire is not material object, it's spiritual ones. His object, the only thing is the object is different, but that's the difference between life and death. When a little child is playing on the floor with toys, very excited about the toys, and then you see, let's say, a teenager playing with something else, and an adult playing with money, and someone else enjoying a great book, another person enjoying a great steak, or whatever. If you talk about the passion in each of these people, there could be all equal. The only difference between them is the object. For an adult, you're not passionate about sitting and playing with little blocks or Legos or whatever they call them today. I don't know. It's a new world since I was a child. You don't have any interest in that. You don't see any value in it. But you think the child's passion is less passionate than yours. It's a child's passion. His or her psyches, as they say, scope is smaller. But the energy is there. It's just on a different object. So the key is to teach people to stop being juvenile in our objects. You can be a 40-year-old and still be playing with blocks, except they're not blocks on the floor. There are other little temporary things that people will go crazy for. A person who grows, matures spiritually, comes to realize that their objects of desire should be different, and therefore the same desire is just channeled towards something else. As I said, it's not as easier said than done. The best, of course, is to nip it in the bud when you can begin, young age, teach a person how to channel those desires in the right direction. Once it's already been channeled in the wrong direction, it's a whole other job. How do you, first of all, break the habit, and how do you rechannel it, rewire it? Which is why, for instance, just to give an example, why in Torah, someone asked me the question a few weeks ago, premarital sexual relationships is like not looked upon as exactly a virtue, to put it mildly. Okay, so I say, well, what's the terrible thing? We're already adults, having sexual relations, not within the context of marriage. I'm not getting in now preaching anybody religion, what the people want to do with their lives. I know the world we live in. I'm not naive. I understand. But the point is, philosophically, what is the fundamental? The fundamental problem is that sexuality is one of the most powerful passions in a person's life. And it can be the ugliest, and it can be the most beautiful. That's how it is. All great energy works that way. As I said, Kol hagodl mechavere, yitzre godl mimeno. The greater something is, the more destructive it could be, or the more constructive it can be. Things that are weaker can only do that much damage, it can only do that much building. So it's a very powerful force that's unleashed. Unfortunately, we live in a generation where it's unleashed far too early for most children. Let's put it this way. People are not emotionally ready for it, for a sexual relationship. And therefore, once it's unleashed, then you've already channeled it to a place that's going to become very difficult to later rechannel it. That's why the Torah has such very rigid, seemingly, and very, very direct regulations regarding sexuality. Not because it wants to, God forbid, kill the passion of it, or in any way, because it's not the Christian view, because sexuality is evil, or sin, or necessary evil. It's because sexuality is, on the contrary, it's such a powerful energy, it's like a fire. And a fire is not channeled. It destroys, and it consumes. And the one it consumes most is you, not other people. Again, this deserves a whole other subject, but I just wanted to give an example. So, the point is the Torah was given in the wilderness, even in the ugliest part of our lives, the wilderness within and the wilderness out there, because the point is that you can't transform even the most shameful and the most decadent experiences that you may think that you are the worst at. You can't separate, and you can't ultimately divorce and disconnect the desire and the object of the desire. And that's when even those corners of the universe that seem like thorn bushes, devoid of anything beautiful, anything holy, can also be transformed into something divine. And that's the ultimate goal why the Torah was given in the wilderness. Bamidbar Sinai, as we read this week's chapter. The entire Torah that we'll be celebrating next Tuesday night, Wednesday, and Thursday, Shavuos, is this message. The Torah was not given to angels. It was not given to perfect human beings. There's no such thing as a perfect human being. It was not given to perfect people. It was given to flawed human beings like us. That's not to condone our flaws. It's to give us the power and this courage and strength to know that you can transform yourself. And you can transform not only as I said, the beautiful parts, the neutral parts, but even those sections and those corners of your life that you may have, in a way, written off. I said, written off your losses, so to speak. Even those dimensions can also be transformed. Not only can they, that's what God desires most. And it's interesting, the word for the purpose of creation, it says, Nesava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lias Lo Yisbarach Dira B'Tachteinu. God desired a taiva. The same word we use for lust and for sexual lust, taiva, we use for God, that God desired. Not he wanted, not he willed, not he envisioned, but he desired. Nesava, taiva. He desired a home, a divine home in this material world. So if you think you have desires, God also has desires. And we'll see who will prevail, whose desire shall prevail. The point being is that God is saying, I'm not just entering your life in a world where there's no desires and no passions. I want your desires and passions to be directed and channeled to what my desire is. And my desire and passion is to transform this even the ugliest parts of this world, the potential ugliness, into a beautiful home. And the ultimate empowering message is that each of us can do it. And you don't have to be perfect to do it, in case you're wondering. And even if you had to be, we're not perfect, that's not going to happen. So we, in our own little imperfect, flawed ways, can tip the scale. We can transform, because we are the entire universe. And as I said earlier, I don't mean that in an arrogant way, it's a responsible way. It means your behavior in its own small microcosmic way, like that story with the Rebbe, when you change something, shift something within you, it affects the universe in a certain way. I have seen this. They call it today the butterfly effect. Somebody sneezes in Kansas City, and there's a typhoon in Cambodia. I don't know. The butterfly effect, that's on a scientific level. But even on a human and psychological level, it's what we project. I've mentioned this many times in this class, that when you project, people see, when you smile, and it comes from sincerity, a person who's secure and confident usually evokes confidence and security in others. At least we want to be around people like that. A few months ago I was speaking at the air base in Chicago. What was it called? The Scotty Air Force Base in Chicago. So I spoke for... They have an annual prayer luncheon, so I was the keynote speaker. Why it's called a keynote is another discussion. Some say it's because it's the guy that leaves, goes on and on and on, so they leave him a note and a key, to lock up when he's finished. So I shared with them this following analogy, a story or whatever that I once heard, and I'd like to share it. So this was the Air Force Base, so I decided to tell them a story about paratroopers. So in training paratroopers, the way it works is anyone that's training goes up in the plane, these paratroopers planes, special type of planes, and they spend time in the plane seeing how others gear up and how they prepare themselves and how they build up the courage, and then they jump out the paratroopers with their parachutes. And after around a month of observing and watching and studying, you're expected to get in line and jump as well. Okay, so this guy is joined, and comes his turn, and they strap him up, and he gets up there, and he's ready to go. He's all excited, and he's watching, making sure all the maneuvers are right. And his turn, he gets to the opening in the plane and looks down. He gives one look down and says, "I'm not jumping." He got scared. So they said, they understood that happens. They said, "Okay, for people like you, we'll give you another month." Another month passes. And again, same thing. He's not jumping. So the guy who's I guess, the commandant of the group says, "Look, maybe this isn't for you. You should join a different part of the armed forces. It's not for you. And not everybody's going to be a paratrooper." So he says, "No, I really like it. I want to be here. So he says, "No, but either you're going to jump, or else we have to make room for somebody else. There's no just hanging around here." But he would insist. He insisted, "I want to stay here." I asked him, why you're never going to jump? Well, he says, I am never going to jump, but I like to be around people that have the courage to jump. You know? So I told it to them that I was never in the army, but I like to be around people in the army, you know, because it makes me feel secure. So, and it's true, because it's like, if you recall, if you have good memories of your parents, those of us that have good memories, remember that walking with your father and giving you certain encouragement, just holding his hand as a little child, has a lot of strength. It empowers you. You see your father as the symbol of strength and stalwart pillar in the home. Same thing could be with a mother. These things have a very big impact on our lives. So how we project absolutely impacts others. But the converse is also true. When you're weak and insecure, what do you think it does to others around you? It makes them also feel weaker and insecure, except for those that are very secure and are not impacted by it. So ultimately, we are small universes, and we affect our environments, and we affect the people around us. It's not true that we're not neutral. You're either empowering people or you're weakening them. I remember my first office meeting I ever had many years ago, and I still hate them, and I hated it then, and I hate it now, but I remember after the first meeting, so I said to one of the people, I said, so what exactly the point of these meetings? You know, it was one of these, I understand the point of a meeting, brainstorming and getting together and comparing notes, blah, blah. That's not what I meant. She says, look, let me tell you a lesson in life. Meetings are going to be one or two things. They're either going to drain you or they're going to empower you. He says, there's nothing in between. So when you leave the room and you feel drained, you know, it's not where you want to be. If it empowers you, that's where you want to be. And that's true also with people. The people either empower you or they drain you. So think about your Rolodex and how many people of each of these two groups you have in your life. I'm not going to tell you to throw out the drainers in your life, but maybe you should put a little D in your database near them. So maybe a little less time with them, a little more time with the E, the empowerers. So you have D and E people. That'll stay between us. So if we ever see a D or E in your phone book, no one will know what it means. Maybe you shouldn't document it. But the point I'm making here is that we impact others and they impact us. I deal with this all the time. I mean, I've sat with people who told me the darkness in their lives, nobody has ever been so dark. And I always tell them, look, you're a very obstinate person, but so am I. You're committed to darkness, I'm committed to light. So you can bring all your darkness, but we'll see who prevails at the end. Because I was taught that light prevails over darkness. You know, when it talks fire and water, so enough fire can evaporate the largest bodies of water. Enough water can extinguish the greatest fires. But when it comes to darkness and light, it doesn't work that way. It could be a very dark room, and you bring in a little light. There's no war. It's not fire and water fighting for dominance. Little ma'at dechahar b'cheshach. Light automatically and naturally pushes away darkness. It's true, if it's a very large dark room, a little light will only illuminate that little corner. But that corner, light is always a natural dominant over darkness. And the reason for that is because psychologically and emotionally that's also true. That as ugly as things are, beauty is always more powerful than ugliness. It may not seem that way to us, because when ugliness manifests, it's very powerful and formidable. But in the big scheme of things, it's because the divine spark within everything will prevail at the end. The only question is whether it'll be today or tomorrow, and whether you're going to be part of it or you're going to be against it. That's our choice, you know. So it's about whether you're going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. What else can I tell you? So that's my few words for this evening. We live in a wilderness. That's a given. We've got a wilderness within us. And the goal is to transform it, not to escape it, not to run away. The entire Torah is about this wilderness, with a few chapters here and there that prepare us to go in. But it's ultimately the wilderness. And the promised land is the end story, but that's already a result of our actions. Our work in this exile, in this wilderness, will bring us to the promised land. But it's not about the reward per se. It's not about the light at the end of the tunnel. It's about the tunnel and bringing light into the tunnel. And then leading you to a place that's greater. So it's about responsibility here and now. So, with those words of inspiration, I want to bid everybody a very healthy week. It's a special week because it's considered to be the days, as it says in the Bible, before they received the Torah at Sinai. It was like Yemei Hakbala. They were the days that prepared. 3 days, 6 days. Rosh Chodesh Sivan, which is 6 days before, that will be tomorrow, right? Is when they came to Sinai, to Mount Sinai. Friday. And they came to Mount Sinai. It says they were there all united as one, as opposed to the earlier divisiveness, because Sinai united them. And then 6 days later will be Shavuos, which starts next Tuesday night. So, technically speaking, we will not have a class, at least not in the physical sense, here next Wednesday, because it's the middle of the holiday. But you could all take this class and create one wherever you are. And it's a great custom to go on Wednesday morning to synagogue to hear the Ten Commandments. The Medrash says that when you hear the Ten Commandments on the day when it was actually delivered 3,322 years ago, we actually recreate the Sinai experience. And remember, what you hear is given on this earth. It's the wilderness. So we should not be afraid, because this wilderness can be transformed. I want to wish everyone a very good Shavuos. So we will be back in 2 weeks, meaning a week from next Wednesday. And tomorrow night, Philip will be giving his Thursday class. We have a few classes coming up, new classes, series that I will soon be announcing in the next month. And I want to also welcome and invite everyone here, that anyone who's interested in being part of a group or one-on-one study and so on, we have opportunities like that too. And we're expanding plenty of our operations and activities in the next few months. So please talk to Velvo right there, a cute guy standing by the door. Two cute guys standing by the door, but Velvo's a little cuter. I'm just kidding. Velvo's like more of a teddy bear. Cute, that's what I meant. Okay. That's not, I didn't mean that in any personal way. Okay, that's that. And please leave also your email address if you haven't left it here, so we can send you notifications about the classes, and we notice what the topics will be each week, as well as if there are any changes, plus the weekly email that I send out. And finally, I want to dedicate the class to our good friend Spencer Schneider. It's dedicated by Spencer in honor of everyone who gets uplifted by this class. That's his beautiful dedication, both online and on location. And I also want to dedicate it to a good friend whose father passed away a few days ago, Jeffrey Silverman, in Los Angeles. His father, Sal Silverman. May his neshama go wherever it has to go, and may we all tame our wilderness and transform it into a beautiful habitat. Thank you so much. And if anybody needs assistance for Shavuos, if you're looking for a place for a meal or other things like that, or anything that we can help you, please again speak to Velvel or myself. We're here to serve. We're all as one, and we all are one organism. Thank you very much, everyone.